Hello and welcome back to the One Take Show podcast. In this episode, we are in conversation with Ms. Namrata Pahwa. Ma'am is an advocate practicing in New Delhi. She specializes in matters pertaining to fashion industry, intellectual property litigation, civil disputes, and various other such areas of laws. In this episode, we talk about fashion law. Yes, we talk about the various laws that have an interplay in the fashion industry, the dispute resolution process, and many other such things. I'm sure this is one of those conversations that really open our eyes towards a new area of law, a new area of practice, and will really benefit every viewer. So please make sure you watch this video till the end. If you like this episode, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions or feedbacks, write them down in the comment section. I would love to read them. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's jump right in. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the One Take Show. I am truly honored to have this opportunity to speak with you. I have been waiting for this opportunity for quite some time now. And I think any law student who is possibly connected with you through various platforms, for example, LinkedIn, genuinely wants to know more about your experience and more about your vast knowledge that you have about various areas of law and what kind of information that we can learn. And thank you so much for taking time off your really busy schedule and sitting down with me for this conversation.
No, my pleasure, Kaustav. It's the only thing that I can do right now is probably just share what I know. So whatever little that I can do for anybody else's knowledge is just my pleasure entirely.
Thank you. Thank you so
So
much,
yeah,
ma'am.
bring on the question.
Right. So, ma'am, obviously, we have a very intriguing theme for this conversation that will come up in some time. I think one of those areas of law that is not very much explored and something that we need to have a conversation about. But before we get into that, I
Hmm.
think it is important for the law students to learn a little bit about you and your experience with law. I think there is a lot of things that we can learn just by your experience. So, when we talk about your experience, maybe perhaps getting into law or with respect to the initial days in law, what was your experience like?
So I'm not sure how many people actually know this. I'm born and raised in Calcutta. I did my bachelor's from Calcutta University Department of Law. There, like any other government college, we didn't really have a very set guidelines, set rules, set infrastructure. It was just, this is sort of like a haywire process. Um, but thankfully, Calgary University didn't have a set internship period, right? Like most colleges have right now. So I had the
Mhm.
liberty of interning, or actually, I made it a point to intern as much as I could over those 5 years. And I remember that one internship, I think I must have just done one in IT, and that sort of stuck with me that may be a place that I like. But I interned in almost all sectors, in civil, criminal, litigation, corporate, everything which I thought that NGO, I thought that like I just try it out and see if I like it. After I graduated, the most common way forward was to join litigation out of Calcutta. So I did that for a bit. Then I wanted to actually uh, expand my sort of horizon, expand my outlook, which is why I chose to do my master's. I had actually applied to the UK. I got through King's and LSE, but I didn't want to do a thesis-oriented master's. Like in all of the colleges, you have to pick one topic and then you write this entire really long paper behind it. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do a master's which gave me an opportunity to pick and choose modules. So which NUS did. So NUS actually gave us the opportunity to study whichever course you like, whatever subject you like, and of course you have a lot of practical assignments over it and not more theory. So that's what I liked, and more than anything else, NUS just it opened so many opportunities for me in Singapore, outside Singapore. We did a past semester in China, in Shanghai. So that was, of course, needless to say, the best time of my life. Um, but I noticed one thing is that after or post my master's, of course, when you're a student, your only motive in life is to get a job or like, secure that one particular job, dream job that you want. And my first interview out of my master's was in Amarchand. And I was completely stoked. And uh, one thing led to another. And I did end up in Delhi after that. I think I finished my master's in August and I came to Delhi in November. Um, so yeah, that is probably my background. I belong to a very academically inclined family. My parents are surgeons. Uh, Extended family members are doctors. So academic theory was probably just the way I was brought up. And it's still a very important part even right now. So um, even now when I think that I want to learn something or do something, I'm not ashamed or I'm not embarrassed by just clicking on a new course, right? Like a lot of people even in my peer sector think that, okay, we've reached a certain stage in our career. We don't need to learn anything new or whatever. But I love doing new courses. I love listening to other people's webinars so that I understand what other people are thinking and not just, I don't want to confine myself to my thoughts. So that's how I look at my journey and probably will do the same in the next 20, 30 years.
Right, right. That must have been
Yeah.
very interesting breaking off from a family of doctors and then choosing a profession in social structure that is law. That must have been really interesting.
Um, Not really. I mean, it was, a doctor, lawyer, and engineer. They're all very standard. They're all very safe professions, may I say. My older brother already took on the vaccine and went on to become a cardiac surgeon. So my parents were very happy with whatever I took, actually. I had left science, I think, when I was class 9. So they were okay with it. They were absolutely encouraging as to whatever I want to do. But they always told me one thing, that whatever you do, it doesn't have to be law, it doesn't have to be medicine, it doesn't have to be any particular subject or any particular kind of course. Just try to be the best in that. Even if you were doing something really tiny, something really minuscule, in your opinion, something which is not really doing much, but just try to be the best in that, and never run after money. That's just my next thing that my parents always taught me. Like, always
Yeah.
gather knowledge, always try to learn as much so that your craft, your skill is the most optimum there is. And then, of course, money will anyway come later. So don't run after these.
Fair, fair. I think I have an interesting question because I think I've received an interesting hint in your answer. I've asked this question to a lot
Hmm.
of seniors, a lot of advocates who practice litigation, particularly, that how useful LLM is for them. And I've received perhaps a similar template of answers where they suggest that perhaps if you want to get into litigation, it is not indispensable. But you've suggested that LLM, especially in NUS, opened a lot of horizons for you. It somehow gave you a lot of different perspectives. It was very useful for you. So a tad bit
Yeah.
of a follow up here, that exactly how important do you think LLM was for you, especially when keeping in mind that you started practicing litigation?
So let me take a back step and say that doing a master's is not essential. Doing a master's is not mandatory. Is not um, something that will get you that job or will get you to the next step of your career. If you're good, you're anyway going to get to the next step or that ideal position that you want, irrespective of if you have that LLM or not. For me, particularly, because I want to break through the monotony that Calcutta University has set inside of me. I wanted to push myself into getting into the international circuit, in the sense that meeting uh, not just my peer group, but professors and other alumni that were part of NUS. Um, but having said that, NUS did sort of put a glaze on my CV. You know what I mean? It did. The first thing that you read on your CV is your education, right? So that was the first thing that is
Yeah.
mentioned, and not Calcutta University. So I think
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in the kind of space that we're in India, um, not being from a national law school is still, um, will it does hinder you from getting that particular job, unfortunately. So,
Mhm.
if you do want to have a job in the top five or the top seven firms that there are, you should have either a master's or should be from a national law school. This is just an unfortunate fact. So I wanted to, of course, as a law student at that point, I just wanted to just get a job, just land a job in any which way. So, but NUS just brought in a lot of different facets. The way the professors teach you, the way you're being taught practically and not theoretically is what I feel that should be done in India as well. Because honestly speaking, BA LLB isn't really a tough course theory wise.
Correct.
So
Mhm.
instead of like rooting on that you need to study so many acts, you need to study so many cases, which you have to do all your life. I think it's time that the law schools really pivot towards the practical side of things. But coming back to your question, masters was very important for me uh, because it really changed my life. Not just because it was an amazing experience, but I would. It's not essential in the sense that you really need it, but it does put a glaze over your CV. It does make
Mhm.
you as a suitor more presentable, if I may put it
Fair.
that way.
So you do consider that having an LLM from perhaps a reputable university from outside would be a differentiating factor, would help you stand out a little bit from the crowd.
So what I think is, I think by the time you graduated,
Mhm.
you have a fair idea as to where do you want to practice. Do you want
Yeah.
to practice abroad? Do you want to practice in India? Do you want to join a firm? Do you want to join in-house? Do you want to join an NGO? You have a fair idea. So if you're sure that you want to practice in India itself, if you want to do litigation in India, you don't need to do a master's because in litigation, you just need practical experience. That's all. The more practical experience you get, the better. So you please don't waste your time and money and effort on a master's degree because it's not going to get you anywhere. If you do want a job, if you do want to get to the top five or the top three firms, yes, then I would recommend doing a master's. In India now, a lot of the national law schools have master programs, private universities have master programs. I think they're really good. They're at par with some of the international courses that we have. So I think you can even consider doing a master's from India. Doing a master's from say abroad only comes into the picture when A, you want to settle there, B, you want an international exposure, or if you want to make contacts, if you make connections, if you want to grow your network. So when those things come into the picture, then maybe I would say go for an international master's. Otherwise,
Mhm.
an Indian one will be equally efficient.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much for answering that question to such depths. I think I've had such conversations, but in-depth answer like these actually help a lot of students to reevaluate their priorities, especially when they're making a choice with respect to entering a certain
Yeah.
industry or not. But with this, I think it is important that we move towards the main theme of this conversation, which I think a lot of law students or perhaps fresh legal graduates or legal aspirants can really help a lot, is talking about something that you've previously spoken about on multiple platforms, the area of law that is fashion law. Now, this is very intriguing because you have a very thorough understanding of the same, and I think the kind of information that we can get out from this episode would be very useful. So we can start off with the first question: that how would you conceptually describe fashion law in India, in your understanding and from your experience?
So let me start by saying that fashion law in India doesn't come under any one particular act or statute. It's an umbrella term. It holds under itself various sectors of law that you will have to, as a law student or as a practicing advocate, probably have some sort of experience in, so that you can give a holistic suggestion to your client. Um, Conceptually, I feel fashion law has, so if I can give it as an example, um, think of it as you are, say, if you're an artist, if you're a designer, if you want to create a garment, right? You think of the idea, you sketch it on a piece of paper. It goes to your karigar who makes the physical garment. It goes to then the manufacturer, then the retailer, then the consumer, and then there's an e-commerce, and then there's a supply chain. If we're importing into or exporting into another country, then it does that. So all the roles that are in or amongst that particular cycle falls under the fashion law ambit. So starting from what kind of a corporate structure do you require as an artist? Do you require a private limited, public limited? Do you require a sole proprietor? That is number one. So business law comes in handy. Talking about contracts, drafting, vetting is a very, very important part of fashion law. Of course, IP is probably one of the most important facets of fashion. Then we come to import export, like I said. In fact, customs law play a huge part when it comes to fashion because there are various instances of counter theft and infringement that happens at the boundaries of the country. So you need to know the custom law. If you have a bigger organization, you need to understand labor laws. There are so many things that would come under the ambit. So I would. It's still even though I've been practicing for 7 years now, and I've been dealing with fashion law for a couple of years now. It's not that I know all of it, not that I understand. There might be other things which fall under the umbrella which I'm not aware even now. So it's just an ongoing process because the fashion statutes or the statutes that come under the umbrella aren't really cohesive in the sense. So we're still evolving as a market. We're still evolving as a legal enterprise in some sense. So there are so many other things that you would require to have some sort of practical knowledge in, and then you can give a holistic advice to your client.
Right, right. I think this is very interesting. And before we get into the specific interplay of various other legislations, various other laws that apply to fashion law, especially when it comes to their practical application, one major question that comes to my mind is what exactly is the impact of a lack of a legislation, a very stronghold statute that would deal with fashion law? Is there an opportunity cost? Is there a damage, or is there a freedom? What exactly is the impact of the same?
So we're internationally also speaking, there isn't something called a fashion law statute. Yes, there are courses, there are master programs, but fashion law is such a vast area that it is difficult to have it under one particular statute, which is why we require we need to call it something else. Maybe I'm not sure what that the government would wish to do that, but there are certain things which the Indian legislation still lacks, such as in the patent system. There's no distinction between a utility or a design patent. One thing, which I think it would really benefit the designers in India. Design counterfeit or design infringement doesn't have any criminal implications. So it's the only remedy out of a design in litigation is civil remedy, is basically fine, whatever. So there isn't any imprisonment, there isn't any things like that. So there's just you can claim profit, you can claim damages, you can claim injunction. That's it. You can't claim anything else. That I feel there should be criminal implications as well. So there are certain things which, as a part of the practical side of things, if I think as my clients would, there are certain things which should be implemented, which would benefit the artists out there.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because this is very interesting, as you previously mentioned, that all of these things need to be covered in a period of time. And right now, we just have certain set of laws that work for us. And for perhaps anyone who is trying to work in fashion industry as a lawyer, obviously, and when they look at these various areas of laws which have an interplay here, from your experience, I think you have already sort of listed down some of them. But from your experience, what are the essential legislations that law students or lawyers, the fresh lawyers, should master in order to be effective in this so-called area of fashion law?
So this question I get very often in different ways, but I can tell you what I did. Okay, I can't tell you what should be done or what is the right way to do it. What I did was so I didn't think that I want to become a fashion lawyer. I didn't when I graduated. I didn't even know there's something called fashion law. It just so happened that since I started my practice, or even before when I was working with a firm and elsewhere, I got a lot of IT cases. I um, got to interact with the clients who were artists, who were designers. So my inclination towards that started. But what I feel or what I have done when I had my independent practice was to get sort of an experience in three aspects. First is prosecution, which means filing of IP. It may be trademark, copyright, design, patent, GI if you're working with a local artisan, maybe GI. These the procedure of filing, the fees required, all that is very important. Second is transactional, so which is contract drafting and vetting. Um, Everything with an artist should be should go through a contract. So there are various contracts which are involved. There's a service provider, vendor, employee. Um, there are joint venture agreements. There are, of course, there is license when it comes to technology, when it comes to IP, then license, franchise, etc. So you need to have a very strong hold on contracts. And of course, third is dispute resolution or litigation. Um, Dispute resolution, when it comes to IP specifically, and when it comes to the fashion ambit, is very interesting because the way you draft your dispute resolution or arbitration clause rather in your agreement will probably be the end all for your client. So specifically when it comes to clients who are in different countries, right? I'm in India, the second party is in New York, the venue of arbitration or seat of arbitration is Singapore. So how do you go about that circumstance? That is very interesting. Um, so once you have some sort of an experience in all these three areas, I would say that you would be capable enough to have or to provide a holistic solution to your client. So
Right.
just try to find ways to get that practice experience, either through
Mhm.
internship or through other ways. However,
Right. Wonderful. That's a wonderful answer, ma'am. I think all these three aspects need to be worked on particularly. But something that obviously interests me the most at this moment is dispute resolution, because that is something that really is very potent when it comes to every possible area of law. And when we talk about dispute resolution, there is always the one aspect that you pointed out is the drafting of the dispute resolution clauses or the agreements, and the kind of after effects that it can have, the long lasting effects it can have. But when it comes to the practical experience of actually going about the arbitration or going about the dispute resolution or going about the litigation process, there must be various aspects that are not available in theory, that you only realize once you start practicing it in practical aspect, something that you might have inquired. So is there any experience of that sort that we can learn something about?
um, this is just the kind of question I ask you will probably just bring about the answer, which will be me talking about the loopholes that are there in the current legal system,
Mhm.
right? So before talking about that, I would just want to tell all the artists who are watching, or all the clients, or all the designers, whoever's watching, uh, first take benefit of the current legislation as is. the current legislation or the current act already provide you with enough protection. Let me start with that. So you can find a way, first understand what you can file your IP in. What should be filed, number one. Then please invest in your IP. It's not something, you can't just let it go. Otherwise, you're letting go of your creativity. If you want to protect it, you have to file it. And of course, there are other ways to protect yourself, like contracts and otherwise. First, please go through that. Please take resort in those things, and then we'll talk about loopholes, because I see a lot of clients, a lot of artists who just are not interested in filing for their IP. They just think it's a waste of time. It takes too long. It's too much of an investment. But the only way that you as an artist can protect this is filing IP. It's in fact not as expensive. It's in fact as I wouldn't say I want to call it cheap, but as reasonable as rupees 500, which is cost of a copyright. So I'm sure you can invest 500 rupees on a copyright if you wish. Now, having said that, there are so many designers out there who ask me that, how am I supposed to practically stop somebody else from, say, infringing my copyright or creating a counterfeit product, or say when we talk about Sabyasachi or other designers out there whose artwork or craft gets replicated in every second store. Now, how are they supposed to stop it? Number one thing that you have to remember, that they have filed for their IP. Number one, the amendment or the new way of doing it is actually the way Rohit Bal and Anita Dongre have actually filed for the entire garment. So what used to happen before was, even while filing for a design application or a copyright application, you cannot file an application for entire garment. Like suppose I'm wearing this kurta, you cannot file an application for the entire kurta. You have to find, say, motifs or elements on the kurta which you file an application for. So when that came into perspective, you have to file multiple applications for one garment. So that was a deterrent. People would say that, why is there, is this a waste? But now we've seen that you can actually file an application for an entire garment. So that solves the problem to a certain extent. Second issue which I've noticed is ant and filler orders. So when we speak in litigation, how are you actually supposed to stop somebody else from counterfeiting or infringing? One way is to get an ant and filler order, but that isn't really effective to the extent that, suppose for an ant and filler order, you need to actually at least know the area where the infringement is happening. You need to know the locality of where the counterfeit is happening. Otherwise, how else will you go through it? How else will you find the local commissioner to go there and do the necessary actions? But on a bigger perspective, it is difficult. So we need to find ways to actually stop doing that. We need to find ways to curb the counterfeit. But on a larger scale, it is difficult to do it. So I would have wanted to give a very crisp answer to my client who would ask me, like, how am I supposed to stop this practically? I can file an application in India, I can file an application worldwide even, but practically speaking, how is it going to help me? So that we have to, maybe as lawyers, maybe as part of the judiciary, we have to find a way to actually do that.
Right. And I think an extension to that really extensive answer would be, are there other issues involved as well? For example, regulatory issues, competition issues, or financial issues, any such other issues? As you previously mentioned, export-import is also a factor that is included in fashion law. So are there any such other issues that you have to tackle as a lawyer dealing with such cases?
Most definitely. It depends entirely on what your client is giving you. So it's from case to case basis. but the experience that I've had, it has up till now at least restricted me only to custom and import and export. We haven't really reached the regulatory form yet. But one thing which an example that I can give is the big fashion house Zara, which actually deals with a lot of custom issues. If you actually understand how Zara supply chain works, it deals with a lot of custom issues, a lot of import export issues. In fact, a very recent client of mine wanted to import sex toys in India. So we were understanding how that works. We understood that importing is not allowed. If you manufacture it in India, then you can circulate it. But import and export of sex toys being obscene, etc., not actually allowed, not legally allowed. So we as lawyers have to actually thank the gray area which the legal acts provide us, because that is where we have to apply our legal mind. So we have to find a way to rectify our clients' needs, or to make way for their query and for their products. But I think through precedents, we've seen that what is not available in your act, you can actually go and actually make a precedent out of it in court. So then that again is cycle, so that it helps the other lawyers dealing with similar clients.
Right,
Yeah.
perfect. I think this is so important from two different perspectives. Obviously, with respect to how the practical aspect of understanding the gray area in law is involved, and how there are differences, for example, manufacturing in a country and importing it from outside, and with respect to the other various regulatory aspect or perhaps custom aspects that are involved here. My one question that I think is very important at this instance is when we talk about the rights of either the designers and then the models or the manufacturers. There are various issues involved, maybe human right issues, maybe IP issues, or any other such issues that are involved here. Labor issues, as you mentioned, if you run an entire industry, the labor law would be attracted in that instance. So what are
Right.
those aspects, and if you've do you have any opinion on how those aspects find themselves in the interplay?
So if you take an example of um, a fashion show, right? Previously, we never really understood the legal aspects of actually creating a fashion show. So, like you mentioned, hiring models, uh, contracts are involved. Hiring light assistants, contracts are involved. Hiring any other vendor or service provider, contracts are involved. Um, if you are getting a license from somebody else, some if you're collaborating with another artist on the runway, the contract is involved. So we've seen the importance of contracts and agreements in these sort of spaces in fashion law. When it comes to labor issues, it will just be how you as an organization have to follow the procedural aspect that labor law gives to you. It has to have a specific number of employees. It has to have, the regulation that it follows, so on and so forth. So when it comes to the organization perspective, then it has a very standard rules and regulation that you have to follow. But other than that, I would say when it comes to today's generation, when it comes to today's age, especially where in the pandemic, we've seen how everything has moved to e-commerce. We've seen how we're all in the e-retail area where nobody's going outside. We're just online clicking and buying stuff. Here, technology has played a really big role in fashion. In fact, technology plays a really big role in curbing counterfeits as well. So we've seen internationally how fashion houses are actually, they've incorporated tech in the sense that they've put in embedded codes in each garment so that they can track the entire system of it. NFTs, which are the right now the upcoming rage, and rightfully so. I
Right.
completely encourage NFTs because that is probably one of the big ways how we can sort of keep a track of where that particular product is going. So tech also has a very important part to play in fashion, especially now, and it's just evolving over time. And thankfully, Indian laws are also taking it into consideration. So we've seen
Mhm.
Indian fashion houses, Indian legal system taking the tech way in, they're imbibing it in a great way.
Right. This is
Yeah.
very fascinating. I think I also personally I'm very fascinated, excited, and very enthusiastic about NFTs. And I could generally have an entire conversation with you, ma'am, about NFTs. But a slight follow up here when we talk about new advances like NFTs, non fungible tokens, and we talk about fashion. How exactly does it assimilate in your opinion? For example, tomorrow, do these fashion brands release their own tokens, and do they then become valuable, or is it their garments that then become valuable in the digital world?
So what usually happens is that I would first want you to give a brief explanation about NFT so that people who are listening can actually understand what we're talking about. So just do that and then I'll follow up with the answer.
Definitely try in order to somehow summarize NFTs. Not that I dare to
Hmm.
explain anything in front of you, ma'am. Is that NFTs basically are those virtual tokens or virtual currencies that are being created by different brands who are now consolidating their values. Just for example, we have those various achievement points, achievement currencies we get on online games. The same are being translated into the creative aspect of what is being made into tokens. For example, there is a Cristiano Ronaldo NFT available that has been created specifically by FIFA EA Sports with the FUT card that it has involved, and a lot of people are they want it as a collectible in the digital world and are paying for it, and henceforth a lot of it is attracting a lot of investment and taking the stocks really high in that world. So in with that, my personal interpretation of the same, when we talk about fashion law, do you see any correlation, and how does that correlation work?
So just to sort of add to your definition, NFT, we can just simply look at as blockchain. So
Mhm, mhm,
NFT number one, yes, it's a way to buy and sell. Number one, it's a way that people out there are wanting to invest. One, because it holds a great value. You can easily purchase something which you otherwise may have not been able to. Number two, it has tech involved. So if you further sell it, you don't require that the letter of certification, etc., etc. It already has that token inside of it, so you'll be able to track that chain of buying and selling through the NFT. When it comes to fashion, we have seen lots of fashion houses internationally only as of now are indulging in NFTs in the sense that they are taking out lines, they're taking out uh, entire ensemble which they're either the clients out there are willing to purchase in it. And this is it's encouraging artists, like independent artists. It's encouraging fashion houses to go out and tell them about their particular artwork so that other people can actually purchase it given the pandemic that we're in now. So that's the sort of interplay when it comes to the art world, even fashion related as well. But NFTs actually originally started with artwork and paintings, right? So it's a very unique space to be in right now, and it's a very exciting space. But especially, I want to see how we deal with it in India.
mhm.
If we can deal with it in India, I'm not entirely sure, but I'll be very excited to know the first NFT actually which would be
Mhm.
sold in India. But as of now, NFT is just very encouraging. It's just a very positive thing which has happened to the art and fashion world.
Right, absolutely perfect. I think I would love to share that level of excitement. I'm genuinely very intrigued by this concept of NFT, but I would cease my questions about NFT here because this episode warrants a particular conversation about fashion law, which I think our viewers are expecting. So, as my last perhaps couple of questions, my last question with this entire theme would be that if tomorrow a certain law student or a fresh legal aspirant is to enter into a legal practice and wants to take up the cases which involve such issues of fashion, and when you see that they need a certain kind of guidance, what are the suggestions that you would give to any such legal aspirant who would want to create a niche in this world?
Um, First, like I've already spoken about, try and understand what fashion law means. Just thinking that you get to work with designers, it's a very fun thing to do, it's a very happening thing to do, which it is. I'm not denying any of that. But along with that comes with so many complications, so many technicalities which you have to be aware of. Because as soon as that IP hits the public domain, that it's just not your IP anymore. So um, first, understand what fashion law is. That thankfully there are so many ways of doing that now. You can do internships, you can listen to these webinars that are just everywhere now. You can read up on fashion law, which is the up and coming thing. Once you've understood what fashion law has, or what everything that it has in its ambit, then, like I said, those three things which are necessary in practical aspects, you must try and get the experience. So just getting the practical experience in, say, prosecution will not be enough when it comes to a holistic solution or holistic advisory. So you have to have some knowledge of prosecution, transactional litigation. Apart from that, you have to want to read up about it. Okay, so I remember as a law student, I was just uh, not bothered about company law. I had no interest in it, about Surface Act and so on. I had just no interest. So it never really came into me that I want to read up on the amendments. I want to read up on what's happening. But when you find that one particular thing which you like doing, which you like reading up on, that's because we know as part of the legal fraternity that is something you have to keep on doing until you retire, right? You have to understand the amendments, you have to read up on cases, not just Indian, internationally as well. You have to know what is happening, and you can only do that if you like it. So make sure you like what you're doing, number one, and then you have to keep on figuring out if there are any amendments. Like in 2021, Design Act has just launched its amendment where it has incorporated startups. So you have to, only once you may have read that you would have known, otherwise you wouldn't have known. Um, so it's a very nice place to be in, fashion law, but unfortunately also a lot of firms in our country don't really have a fashion law um, vertical, right? So to speak. They have like civil, they have like criminal, they have litigation, they have whatever, but they don't have a fashion law vertical. So either work with or intern with, say, practitioners like me who have, I wouldn't say 100% of my practice is fashion, but I would say 70% is fashion. Otherwise, I do other civil cases as well. But work with these kind of firms and independent practitioners who actually do have some cases in fashion law. Otherwise, um, if you want to join an in-house uh, position where you want to be the legal counsel of, say, Louis Vuitton, if you want to be the legal counsel of whoever, Gucci, Prada, etc. Um, even even to land that particular job, when they'll be taking your interview in that process, they will be asking you these things. What have you done? What is your practice, etc., etc. So uh, practically, I would say that you have to go through the process. If you say you want to reach that in-house position, then you will have to do all of this. And it's in fact so easy to understand that now because sitting at home, we have so much access to information online. Even 10 years ago, when I was yeah, 10 years ago, when I was a law student, I didn't really have that much access, right? Or maybe I didn't have the knowledge to maybe like just go online and search. But now there are so many webinars, so many things that you can actually be a part of to actually make you realize that, okay, this is something that I'm interested in. So that is probably the way forward that law students should take it. Yeah.
Absolutely perfect. I think this is the kind of conversation that will facilitate that level of realization. I hope that everyone who's watching this episode realizes how important this conversation is. An entire area of law with the possibility of exploration beyond imagination of the various interplays of laws has been deconstructed with such efficiency and such simplicity. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think this is one of those very conversations that I was looking for a very, very long time, and that have really answered most of the questions, very new age coming questions as well, for example, LFT and all, and also deconstructing the very thorough understanding of fashion law, of the various legal aspects involved, of how the practice evolves and how the fresh legal aspirants can assimilate themselves within the practice and can adapt accordingly. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you so much for this conversation. Before we wrap this up, do you have any closing remarks for our listeners?
Um, my only thing I would like to say to everybody watching, be it law students, lawyers, artists, whoever is watching this, just uh, one a just like what you're doing. Number one, otherwise you can't have a prolific career or a validated career in any aspect at all. So you have to number one like what you do. If you don't like it, don't hesitate in changing your path at any point. Now that's number one. Number two, just if you can't keep on thinking that you know everything or you can't be satisfied with where you are. I think not being satisfied, not being content with your knowledge or understanding is probably my way of seeing it. So just keep on adding to your knowledge, keep on reading, keep on writing. You don't necessarily have to write articles which are 50 pages or like 1,000 pages. Just write small articles. Just try to understand the problem at hand and read and write. That's just enhance your way of looking at it. So just do that. And I think every lawyer has or every legal aspirant has before him or her a great scope of the great ambit of doing whatever he or she wishes. So good luck to whoever is watching and good luck for if you wish to have a career in fashion, fashion law rather. Um, if you have any further questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. I can only tell you how much I know. So apart from that, that even we'll both just Google and figure it out. But just feel free to get in touch.
Ma'am, to learn from your experience in itself would be a very adventurous journey for anyone who either seeks your advice or wants to learn from your experience, and something that is obviously not exhaustive to any extent, something that we can all learn more and more about. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Have a good evening.